I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time, I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict though, so my memory is kind of hazy, so I do apologize if most details aren't there and major other events are left out. I'm now sober almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, somewhere between Richfield and another town, one of those small towns in between. I'd finished at the store late, about 10 to 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning rather than drive the 2 hours in the morning. As I'm driving down the highway, Google Maps has told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, turned left into it. A long dirt road with nothing around me. Pitch black darkness other than my high beams. Maybe 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanic knowledge. Of course, I look down at my phone and see I had no cell service at all. I check my work phone and it's the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I could get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but this trip I had forgotten to bring it with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this unless you had to or it led to a specific point. And I wouldn't even call it a road, to be honest, more of a trail. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall. I'm not anxious or get scared very easily. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. Every step further from the truck made me feel more tense though. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing. Something you would hear out of a kid's show. Right behind me, I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots are sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb. I hear it again, but closer, louder, like if it were 4 to 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now, eyes darting like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in the paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something, or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby. Crouched down, my right knee hurting from all of the rocks on the ground. But I didn't care. I needed to hide. The rocks were one of those 3-footish mound rocks. The moon was shining bright so I could see some things. As I am scanning the desert, I see silhouettes of 2 people running. I can barely make them out, but my eyes have them adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off to not give away my location. I hear them talking, but I'm far enough away to not be able to understand what they're saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything I had done wrong in my life. They didn't even send because I didn't have any service, just coping with the traumatic event. I'm not a small guy, by the way, 5'10" and 230 pounds, but I was unarmed and outnumbered. And who knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general direction of where they were at. Scrambling around like mosquitoes, I had the thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 small rocks. I'm not religious, but I tried praying to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away toward the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly crouch walked through the brush back to the truck. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. There were 3 confirmed people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brushes stab me into my cargo work pants. I hear them tailing me. I could not turn around. I did not care to see who it was or what it was chasing me. I see the truck. The truck driver's side door is completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more, flew into the driver's seat in the truck, and did the most stupid thing ever, but it was the only thing I could think of. I started it. It took a couple of tries to start it, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter in drive and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I saw hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off into the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as it drove. Silence. Nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I seen town lights. I was sweating, white knuckles on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m., threw myself into a local 7-Eleven looking terrified. The cashier asked me what was wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old burly looking man. I'm covered in tattoos, head to toe, so he treated me almost as a criminal myself. LOL. Turns out, some hose had burst. Do not remember exactly what it was. I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and said to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. Mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops weren't much help though. They basically looked at me like I had been up too long and I was hallucinating. I was not, and had asked me if I had taken drugs or had drunk and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I can't remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call came and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it, and I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, expensive tools and copper? I have no idea. I'm just curious. Who do you think these people were, and why were they hunting me like an animal? Has anyone had a similar experience before? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? Edits. The truck was looted. I remember all the wire, pipe, and some power tools were taken. We humans are not afraid of being alone in the dark, but of finding someone else in the dark with us. This took place when I was around 7 or 8, so my brother must have been 12 or 13 when this happened. Since my brother was now considered a teenager, my dad figured it would be safe to stop asking my grandma to pick my brother and me up after school because he couldn't since he was working. He was an extremely hard-working single father. Anyways, so my brother and I started walking home alone after school, after getting off of the bus. It was like a 2-minute walk back to our place from the bus stop. Shortly after, a middle-aged man with the creepiest vibes started showing up across the street from our house, and he would just stare. Mainly, he wore this beat-up, extremely dirty and vibrant jumpsuit. Like, very vibrant. The only reason I saw him was because of that jumpsuit that looked like it belonged to the 80s. He wouldn't do anything. He would just stare at our house from across the street. He would usually appear 5 minutes after we got home, then leave maybe 5 to 10 minutes before my dad got home. At first, I thought he was just a strange new neighbor. It wasn't uncommon in my area for creepy old men, or pedophilic construction workers and drunk college students to lurk around town. It was about all my dad could afford at the time. After a while, though, I got a bad feeling that he wasn't a neighbor. He grew somewhat ballsy. At this point, he had openly been observing us for about half a year. It soon escalated from him just staring at us when we got home to him physically waiting at my brother's and my bus stop. 1. I already hated going home after school. And 2, this creep is now practically making this unavoidable. I was a bundle of nerves, and so was my brother, when we got off the bus and saw the guy standing there staring at us. I immediately grabbed my brother's hand and started fast walking home. I hated hearing his footsteps lurk behind us. My scaredy-cat-o-meter was finally so damn off the charts that I was begging my brother to call the police. Instead, he grabbed the metal baseball bat that was next to the door and told me that if anyone, besides our dad, walked through that door, he would kill them. I was so mad at him for weeks after that, but looking back now, I kind of extremely admire my prepubescent brother, who would be willing to do anything to protect his little sister. That night, we finally told our dad about our daily evening visitor. He was furious, but also sad that his kids didn't tell him sooner. We felt like it was somehow our fault that this man was following us, so we figured that my brother and I would get in trouble for the man's actions. A creepy man had been stalking his kids for nearly a year without his knowledge. He was devastated. I sympathize with him now. My dad talked to a woman who waited at the bus stop for her son and explained the situation to her. She had thought that the man was someone that he asked to watch us since she noticed our grandma no longer picked us up. After my dad talked to the woman, my brother and I never saw our stalker again. Years later, I found out that the woman, while waiting for her son to get dropped off by the bus, noticed the creep in the same jumpsuit and the same toque. She walked right up to his face and told him, "If you don't leave those poor kids alone, I won't even call the cops. I'll take matters into my own hands and beat the living heck out of you. I never want to see your face around here again." She was a tough, mean-looking lady, but a huge softie with the biggest heart ever. Anyways, she was mean enough looking that the guy never lurked outside our home or bus stop again. Not sure if this would serve as any significance to you guys, but my upstairs neighbor later claimed that they used to see him go dumpster diving down the street from our home. I met Austin in the fall of 2024 via a message he had sent me over Facebook. I was lonely, really lonely. I just moved to a new city with very few friends because I transferred from community college to university, so I gave him a chance. I messaged him back and we began chatting. We had a mutual friend, so I thought nothing of it. Maybe she told him about me. Maybe he had seen me in passing. Time began to pass and we got much closer. Soon, I met him in person for a date. After this date, things began to move very fast. We hung out all the time and stayed at each other's places almost constantly. He was very sweet at first, and I was so excited to be around someone I believed was so genuinely kind. Fast forward a couple of months and I moved into his apartment. It was a bad idea, I know, but my current living situation was growing increasingly more toxic as I was living with 6 other girls. This was when things began to go downhill though. He introduced me to his daughter Lily. She was so sweet and I adored her. He didn't get to see her much, as he would tell me his baby mama was insane and keeping her away from him to control him. As I got to know him more, he began to grow more violent towards me. It started with small things like yelling at me over misplacing a phone charger or not putting something where he thought it belonged. As time began to pass, the instances of his anger increased and became more dramatic. He would scream at me almost every day. It was always my fault if he lost his keys, if I was home from work later than expected because he needed childcare, or if I went to visit family or friends. It didn't matter what the situation was. Everything was my fault. In addition to this, he was serially cheating on me, as I would find out later. Not only that, but some were with minors. Some more time passed and we moved to a much larger apartment in a different suburb of our city. Things were well for a while and I still remained oblivious to his horrible internet activity. After a very late night at work, he wakes me up and shows me a tiny little kitten. "I found her at work and brought her home for you," he whispered to me. I named her Stripe, and she was my soul cat. I and this little kitten did absolutely everything together. About a month passes and I come home from work pretty late in the evening as I was a server at the bar. He was infuriated at me as he needed childcare so he could go to work. On top of that, he lost his keys and it was also my fault. He screamed in my face, called me names, and began to escalate the situation while I just sat there with tears rolling down my face. At some point in his anger, he grabs Stripe and throws her against the bathroom floor because she quote-unquote bit him. She weighed less than 3 pounds and it wouldn't have hurt. She began to have a seizure and died in my arms on the way to the emergency vet as I gave her CPR. He had just killed my kitten in cold blood. For more context, he also had a dog named Cookie that he beat to the point of seizures. I'm glad to be able to say that I kept this dog and did not allow him to have the dog back again. I felt so trapped. I had no friends to reach out to and no family I felt safe staying with. I was isolated with a very dangerous man. I feared walking in the door. I feared leaving the house. I feared him. I was actually very depressed, and I couldn't afford the rent alone, as he was spending my money on top of his money. I had nowhere to go and no one to help. More time passes. August 2025, and I uncover his internet activity because one of the girls he was talking to messaged me. That was the final straw for me, so I broke up with him. We still lived in the same space, however. He was in the bedroom for his daughter, and I was in my own room. Fast forward to November of 2025, and he verbally assaulted me, saying absolutely nasty things. This escalated to him trying to choke me, throwing me all around the house and being physical to the point I actually feared for my life. I tried to leave and he wouldn't let me. He tried to take my animals and let them out somewhere. He tried to hold a gun to me. It was scary. I couldn't call the cops though. They would have booked us both, and I had finals the next day and was scared to fail all of my classes as I could not afford to repeat them. At some point, I do decide to take the risk to call the cops, but he breaks my phone by snapping it in half. I decide to run for my life and he forcibly took my house key, but I had my car keys so I ran. I drove until I got to my father's house and fell asleep on his couch. From this point, he would not leave me alone. With over 100 calls and text messages per day, going from kind to abusive almost every 2 messages. I move in with my very distant mom and take my animals somewhere safe. I pleaded with him to leave my apartment because he wasn't on the lease, but he repeatedly refused as he wanted to fix our family. I begin to settle in at my mom's house and see people that I know reconnecting with old friends. As time passes, so do the holidays. I get over 50 calls on Thanksgiving, 100 on Christmas and New Year's. He was still threatening me and harassing me, and I remained at my mother's. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a CPO, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was scared of it being denied. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a restraining order, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was actually terrified of it being denied. On January 10th, I get to move back to my apartment and it was trashed. I spent 2 weeks working to put the pieces back together and resume some form of my life. I had within the past couple of months started seeing someone long distance casually. He was lovely and offered to help me clean up all the pieces of my life, which was not something he had to do. My ex still harassed me from his number as well as from fake numbers, posing as a stalker threatening my life. He posed as a different person in some of the texts saying he was going to get me. In February, I couldn't take it anymore. I filed the restraining order and was granted an ex parte based on my testimony. I was still getting texts from the fake numbers threatening me, saying that they knew where I was and what I was doing. After the court hearing it all stopped, it was finally silent and I was finally safe. He still tries to find ways to mess with me, like giving people my number, saying I'm easy, or making posts that relate to me and my friends telling me they've seen something weird. He tried to get family to reach out to me and they wouldn't. Now I'm happy. I'm seeing my childhood best friend and we're in love. He's so kind and exactly what I need. I feel safe. But I still look behind my back all the time to see if somebody is following me. I still get texts from numbers asking if I'm easy, then telling me they got my number from Austin. I still need to seek therapy, and I still need to file a report of him violating his restraining order. But overall, I'm happy now. So, let's not meet again, Austin. I hope you get what you deserve, which is nothing. I'm an 18-year-old female living in a small town in Michigan. When this incident took place, I had been working a few hours a week in a small pizzeria. It was in my town, and I had been working there for about a year when my boss decided to go on vacation. She and her family lived in an apartment below the restaurant, and 2 other apartments were overhead. In order to get into these apartments, you had to go to the back of the building and down a sketchy set of stairs or the grass slope where you would find her door and the stairs leading up to the apartments above. Beyond that is a yard and then some woods. I think it's important to mention that there was absolutely no reason to be behind the restaurant unless you were trying to enter the apartments. Now, I usually worked with my mom because we got stuff done easily and I hated answering phones. One night, my mom was feeling ill, so I had to work with another lady. She was very sweet but not very efficient, so I was working hard to keep up and getting a bit agitated when she told me that we needed Parmesan. I agreed to go get it from the store just down the road if she promised to not make me answer phones for the rest of our shift. There were only about 2 hours left, which were normally pretty slow, so I guess it didn't matter that much anyways. As I was getting in my SUV, I saw a guy pull into the small parking lot with a beat-up car and park near the back. He was lanky and wearing oil-stained shop clothes, which was and still is totally normal around here. He got out and retrieved a bag from his trunk and headed down the slope. I know this guy wasn't a renter because I'd never seen him before, and the renters frequently ordered pizza. It was possible he was a friend of one of the renters, but that didn't seem right. It was 9:30 at night, and one renter was a single mom, and the others were 2 brothers with mental health issues that were pretty antisocial. I was getting bad vibes, so I grabbed my knife from the center console and tucked it up my sleeve. Call me paranoid, but there had been a lot of car fires and break-ins around the time, so I was nervous to go anywhere unarmed. It might have been a stupid thing to do, but I consider my boss a friend and didn't want this guy to hurt any of the renters or steal from any of the apartments. I decided to go see what he was doing, just in case he had any ill intentions. I got out of my car and walked quietly to the slope. There were motion-activated lights, so I could easily see what he was doing. He was fiddling with an old key ring and trying to get into my boss's apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked loudly so that my coworker could hopefully hear me through the open back door. He was startled but smiled and told me he worked for my boss's husband and he was there to feed the dog and let it out. His smile was creepy, the kind that a liar gives when they're trying really hard to convince you. My boss did have a dog and her husband did own a fabrication shop, so his story seemed to check out, but I still was not convinced. I decided to go get the cheese and check again when I get back. "Okay, let me know if you need help with anything." I tried to sound as normal as possible, but I was seriously creeped out. I hustled at the store and went back to work. I'd been gone for only 15 minutes when I got back, and surprisingly, he'd already gone. I was still feeling suspicious and bad for the dog who'd been shut in for a good portion of the day, so I decided to text my boss when I got out of work. Fast forward 2 hours, and I was on my way home. I got to my door when I decided to check Facebook. As I was scrolling, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of my boss with her dog on the beach from earlier that day. I called my boss and then the police to make a report. It turned out the guy had been fired by my boss's husband earlier that week for making an inappropriate comment about his 19-year-old daughter and repeatedly harassing other female staff. This guy had planned some sort of revenge scheme, but didn't know they had left for vacation. His bag was full of tools and a couple of knives. During questioning, he told them that the only reason he left was because he thought I was watching him. Thankfully, he went to jail for that and a couple other things that he'd been wanted for previously. This still creeps me out to this day, and I hate to think what could have happened if they had been home. This was 10 years ago. Let me start by saying I was, and sometimes still am, a horrible people pleaser. It was much worse then, and I would regularly go against my own judgment and gut feeling for fear of seeming rude or disagreeable. A 28 female was 18. Just moved 3 hours from home to a major city to go to college. I had just, a week beforehand, ended my long-term relationship because I was starting to see how emotionally and physically abusive he was. I was playing around on Facebook in my dorm room and got a friend request and message from a guy I didn't recognize. The message said something like he'd seen me around campus a few times. joked about similar schedules, blah blah blah, and ended with him asking me to go out with him to see a movie. I read the message and ignored it and the friend request. I joked about it later to roommates who managed to convince me that I was somehow being a jerk by not at least agreeing to meet up with him for a coffee or something. They tossed it'd be good for you to get out into the dating world again, because you're young and in college, have some fun. So I let this eat me up inside until I convinced myself that getting coffee down the block at Starbucks, very public 100 yards from my dorm, would be a safe way to not be rude to this complete stranger. I let him know via Facebook and we make plans for a coffee a few days later. Fast forward to the coffee date. I walk down to Starbucks to meet him and he's standing outside a very closed Starbucks. My mind is already reeling. What do I do now? I'm here. It'd be very rude to just go home because I'd imply that he scares me and I don't want to be alone with him. All of which were accurate though. He starts joking about Starbucks being closed and offers to drive us to a movie. I politely declined, making excuses about money and insisted I was uncomfortable letting him pay for me. He suggested a bar on campus. It was more of a student hangout kind of deal, but they served alcohol. I jumped on that because it was a public place, walking distance, and students and professors would be there. He tries to insist on driving, but I am adamant that we walk. It's a nice night and garbage like that. We start walking over there, and the conversation just starts getting more and more bizarre and making me really uncomfortable. He starts asking me if I'm okay with him being Indian and if I've ever been with an Indian guy before, saying that most girls didn't seem to want to date Indian guys. I answer questions but otherwise don't really involve myself in the conversation. He was fine with that because apparently he had enough to say for both of us. We finally get to where he can see the bar and it's closed. I start really looking around and notice that there are not very many people around. Maybe one or two running across the green and a biker here and there, but all pretty far off. I am beyond uncomfortable and trying to come up with a polite excuse to get myself home as quickly as possible. He starts to walk toward the bay and back by the big docks. I know the area well enough, my friend. I used to like to hang out back there to watch the water and smoke because there's never any people there. I'm panicking internally, but mentally, I can't justify turning tail and running because he hasn't actually done anything to warrant that response yet. So I just follow behind. He continues on his rant about women and Indian men getting angrier and angrier by the minute. You probably think I'm ugly, don't you? White women always hate Indian men. You are all stuck up, he said. You think you're so much better than me. Even Indian women don't want to date me, he said. They would rather be with a white guy with less body hair. That's why you don't ever try to talk to me when I see you running back and forth to class. At this point, he stopped walking and is just pacing and yelling. I'm terrified but trying to stay calm and use all of my talking skills to talk him down. I can't put into words how hateful and full of blind rage his tone was. My back is to the bay and only a few feet from the water. I'm trying to move myself casually to where he's closer to the water and I'm closer to my escape, should I need to run. Fight or flight is going full blast, and at this point, I think running is going to make me angrier and I won't get very far. I start telling him I agree with him, how women are awful and shallow and they should give him a chance. Anything I can come up with because I honestly thought he was going to take all of his rage at the female gender out on me. That they would find my body floating in the bay tomorrow morning. By some miracle, it worked. He calmed down and started telling me I was different than the other girls. I just kept up the same routine. I started walking back towards my dorm slowly, like you would with a friend just casually trying to get moving again. It worked. He walked with me back to my dorm building. I tried to convince him there was no need, that I could walk myself back, but he said he was worried I could run into some creep if I was by myself. There was only one building for the whole campus, and he already saw me leave it, so damage was already done there. He asked if he could come inside with me to my room. I lied and said I couldn't have guests after 9, and booked it inside. I hid in the front lobby watching to see if he hung around outside or left right away. Thankfully, he left. I briefly explained to the RA what happened and that he should not ever be let into the building no matter what. The only door that could get inside the building was that one, and it needed a key card to get in. I went back up to my room, blocked him on Facebook, and then for added measure ended up disabling my account for a while. I also went back home with my mom that weekend and bought some pepper spray. This is going to be a long one since I've never managed to really put the whole story together until now. This happened in a relatively small town and city in Canada in April of 2016, right before I graduated high school. I was 17 at the time. It was my grad year, and most of the people in my grad class were partying and planning activities to celebrate our upcoming graduation. One of the traditions in my town is to play a grid game called Rainbow, which is basically a version of Predator-Prey. A bunch of people would meet up at a location on one side of the city, and the goal was for the runners to make it to a spot on the other side of the city without getting caught by the seekers, which were groups of 3 to 4 in their cars. Runners also went in groups of 3 to 4, but they had to be on foot. My grad class was around 200 people, and I would say this particular night, there were about 60 to 70 people playing. This takes place after it's completely dark outside. It was probably around 11 p.m. that night. I had planned to be a runner in a group of 4 with my boyfriend at the time, as well as my friend and her boyfriend. However, my now ex-boyfriend bailed last minute to go do drugs at a different party with his friends, which left me as a third wheel with my friend and her man. No problem, right? I should have never gone. Now for reference, I am tiny. Like 4'11" tiny, and weighed around 80 pounds at the time. I genuinely look like I am around 13 if I don't wear makeup and you don't get a good look at me. Anyways, my friend and I got all dressed up in all black and put war paint on our cheeks, and the 3 of us headed to the spot. I live in what I've always considered a safe town, mostly full of families or retired people. There are only a few bad-ish neighborhoods in this city. The game started and we all ran, and all was fun up until about an hour, in midnight. We had to cross through one of said neighborhoods. While we were walking along a residential street sidewalk, one of the seeker cars came ripping down the street and the 3 of us ran. Of course, my friend and her man stayed together and I got separated somehow in the scuffle. Once the seekers weren't in the immediate area, I started calling out to my friends and could hear their voices somewhere in the distance. I texted my friend and she said they were in the alley on the other side of the houses, while I was still on the sidewalk in front. I had 2 options. I could walk to the end of the block and find the alley that way, but I was about 20 houses away in either direction and I knew for a fact that there were seekers nearby who had seen us and knew we were in the area. My other option was to cut through someone's yard and immediately be in the alley and reunite with my group. I chose the latter. Why I did this, I will never know. Like I said, I am a tiny girl and this was known to be a rough neighborhood. I looked at the nearest houses and spotted one that didn't have a front gate. His lawn went straight into the backyard, save for a few shrubs on the side of the house. I thought this meant that I could go straight through and that there wouldn't be a back fence. I chose this house and stepped over the shrubs and jogged towards the back. As I did, a motion light came on that illuminated the backyard. This scared me, but I was already in, so I figured I would just get out as fast as possible. When the light came on, however, I noticed that there was in fact a fence, and about a 6 to 7 foot tall one at that. I certainly couldn't jump it, but there was a gate with a latch that I ran to. I remember having to stand on my tippy toes to even reach the latch. While fumbling with it, I heard a noise. It was the sound of the back door of the house opening. The houses in this area were quite small and often dilapidated. I would say that the back door was only around 15 feet from the fence. It had some concrete stairs with wrought iron railings. I remember turning my head towards the noise and having around 1 second to see this gigantic bald man in his stained white briefs charging at me from the store. Probably 6'5" and, I don't know, maybe 300 pounds. He hit me like a freight train, slammed into me so that I hit the fence hard. I think he came at me with his hands at neck height, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember, though, vividly, was how he picked me up, my full body weight by my neck. I remember trying to shriek and hearing my own voice barely choking out a sound. He immediately started towards the door that he came from. As he dragged me towards his house, I remember being sure that something horrific was going to happen to me and that I was going to die. I remember his hairy, sweaty body absorbing my kicks in attempts to hit him. I was trying to scream the whole time, but both his hands around my neck were an unescapable, silencing death trap. Right in front of his steps, my iPhone flew out of my hoodie pocket and hit the concrete, reminding me of its existence altogether. But now it was sitting on the ground as he hauled me off the stairs. I still don't know how I mustered the strength, but that wrought iron railing gave me something to finally leverage myself against. I managed to pull myself away from his grasp, using that fence, just long enough to grab my phone. His hand slipped off my neck, but caught my hoodie's neckline, which tore to my sternum. I was wearing another shirt underneath. The hoodie is still the grim reminder of this day. For some reason, I can't throw it away. Now, he immediately caught me again, but in my mind, I was for sure going to die if I didn't have my phone to somehow call for help. But being out of his grasp allowed for another thing. I could scream. I knew my friends were somewhere in the back alley, and I screamed bloody murder at the top of my lungs once I could. He caught me again and dragged me into his house, and I vaguely remember him trying to cover my mouth or grab my throat again, but I'm not sure. Upon entering his house, I saw where he was taking me. The steps into his pitch-black basement were only about 4 feet from his back door, and he was headed straight for it. I was certain that I was going to be dragged into his rape/murder dungeon, and nobody would ever see me again. This freak had 1 foot down the stairs when he heard it. Before his back door fully shut, there came a sound from outside that I believe saved my life. It was my friend calling my name. They heard me screaming and were very close to the yard I was in, so naturally, they started freaking out and calling my name. And this guy heard them, and he froze in his tracks, eyes fixed out the back door now. He realized I wasn't alone. All at once, he let go of me and stepped in front of the door, blocking my escape back through it. But then he started asking me all sorts of questions like he was in a frenzy. Why were you in my yard? You were stealing and vandalizing, weren't you? I was pretty messed up, but starting to explain the game I was playing, referring heavily to the fact that I was with a group of friends and was just trying to cut through his yard. I was, now that I got a good look at him, completely naked aside from some stained, saggy white briefs. After about 30 seconds, my friend called my phone, and I have never picked up a call so fast. I immediately started yelling at her that I'm in someone's house and he's trying to kidnap me, what the house looked like and stuff. I stayed back from him and stayed on the phone with my friend while he was screaming at me that he performed a civilian's arrest because I was vandalizing his property. He repeatedly threatened to call the police, to which I said, "Please do," every time. The police would get me out of this house. He never did call them, but he made me write my name on a piece of paper, which I did because I just wanted him to let me go. He kept me in his house, seemingly trying to figure out what to do. Until around 2 minutes later, there was violent banging at the front door. My friends had found his house and were just going to town on this guy's door. Then he finally let me go back out the back door. I promptly threw up on his front lawn from nerves as soon as I was reunited with my friends. My gift to him. You could stop listening here. The rest is what happened after. Disclaimer, I understand that I was trespassing, but I was not stealing or vandalizing. What he did, I believe to be assault and unlawful confinement, not a civilian's arrest. And may I remind you that I am under 5 feet tall, standing on my little tippy toes to reach the gate, my long blonde hair hanging down my back. He knew I was a little girl, and I don't believe for a second that he truly thought I was a threat to his property. I will never forget the way he stepped 1 foot to that basement. So it goes. Aftermath. Later, I had some bruises on my neck. My hair was coming out in clumps from where it had been ripped out during the struggle, and I was missing many of my piercings, including my belly ring somehow. From the sheer violence of the altercation, I told my parents and whatnot about it and went to bed that night. I don't think I slept. The next morning, my mom convinced me to go to the police. At the time, I remember wanting to just hide somewhere safe for the rest of eternity, but my mom convinced me that he can't just get away with what he did to me. I went to the police station where I had to wait around an hour to speak with a constable. Because I live in a smaller town, there aren't a lot of cops on duty on a Sunday, and the cop I would talk to was currently on another call. What we didn't know at the time was that my dad was the reason the cops were busy. Now, my dad kind of looks like a freak. He looks like a long-haired biker and drives old vintage cars with ported exhaust. So they're as loud as a Harley. He was angry. He pulled up at this guy's house and apparently stood and stared in his front window for a long time. Then he headed to the back alley and did the same. I learned that this guy had multitudes of security cameras all over his house, and my dad apparently stared into one in the back for upwards of 8 minutes without moving. The guy called the cops on my dad, who left just as they showed up. This guy then gave a statement to the cops before I got there, claiming that I had been vandalizing his property and was sending people to further mess with his house. Of course, he had no evidence of vandalism, and only my dad being freaky as evidence that anyone was going to mess with it. He told the officers they did not have footage of the altercation, which I think is BS. He just didn't want them to see him attacking me and dragging me into his house. The same cops came back to the station where I was waiting, and before I got to give any statement, they described my dad to me and asked if I knew him. I told them it was my dad, and they said, "We don't know who you're affiliated with, but you need to leave this man alone." I remember being taken aback by this because here I was to give my statement, and they'd already decided this guy was the victim of the situation. I was pretty shell-shocked, and trying to tell the story was clearly tricky for me. The cop hardly wrote anything down, and then he basically threw the book at me. He told me, "You were the one trespassing. Do you understand that Mr. X could press charges on you?" I was flabbergasted. I had literally been attacked and had bruises on my neck, a torn sweater, and hair falling out in clumps as evidence, and the cop said I was the criminal. This scared me because I had ambitions for the future that could not include any kind of record. This shut me up. I agreed to let it go and left the situation. In hindsight, I think the cops really didn't want to deal with the situation and just wanted it to go away. They succeeded. For a few years, I was terrified of seeing this man again and was convinced he was going to eventually show up at the post office I worked at, since his neighborhood was in my outlet's jurisdiction, but I never did. My dad continued to drive very slowly past his house from time to time, including the alley, and even got one of his actual biker friends to park right out front and smoke a cigarette while looking over at the house. The cop showed up on him, but it's not illegal to pull over and have a smoke. I like to think this guy lived in fear that the Hells Angels were after him, at least for a while. I coped by convincing myself that this was his messed up idea of a citizen's arrest and that he wasn't trying to kidnap me. But telling the story reminds me that may have not been the case. I've never told this story in full before, so if you made it this far, thanks for reading. This happened to me last Friday. I'm currently in my senior year of college. I have some pretty decent scores, but I want to make a stellar statement of purpose before applying to my dream school. For an MS in computational biology. Fingers crossed, guys. As both my younger sister and I are currently home from school on winter break, and she may be possibly the loudest person to ever exist, I typically sequester myself away in the library with a large Duncan. This is needed. My strong suit lies in mathematics and not writing, so I need all of the brain power I can get. You might be saying, what is she doing on Reddit? Write your essay. But I need a break or I will go crazy, guys. I get to the library and head to my normal spot, which nobody seems to know about. Second floor tucked in the corner. Good Wi-Fi, near a cozy heater. No windows to distract me with an enticing view. Except there's somebody sitting at my table. I mutter a sorry and turn to walk away. This man stops me, claiming I can share his table. There didn't seem to be a lot of open spots downstairs, so I accepted. About 30 minutes of silence later, he asks what I'm so intently working on. I explain. He chuckles and says, "A girl with a brain. You shouldn't be wasting all of your time at school, though. You're too pretty." Which, ew. I don't really feel like debating this, so I just awkwardly laugh. He goes on to explain how if he had a woman who was so smart, he would never let her leave the house, or fear she might discover something better. I ignore this. He then says something really weird. "Has anyone ever told you look like Dag?" Huh? What do you mean? I ask. The Dag, from Mad Max. It takes me a few seconds to process this. I have honestly had a couple of friends text me after seeing the movie and tell me they see some resemblance, but I'm not going to participate in this conversation. No. Short, blunt, and to the point. We continue on in silence. At this point, I've chalked the afternoon up as a loss. My concentration is shot to shit, and I won't be able to focus anymore with this creep here. I fake a phone call because society tells me to be polite, and I still have trouble not doing so. Huh. How funny. My mom needs me to come home in the middle of the day. I gather my stuff and nod to the man. Walk to the car and curse when I realize I left my flash drive on the table. Worried the guy might have taken it, I rush back, and the flash drive is there, but he's gone. Weird. Well, if he's gone and my table is open, I guess I'll stay. 5 minutes later, I'm all but engrossed back at my work. Here's something important. Not being able to find any hair ties. Seriously, where did they go? I simply stuck my hair up on my head with a big old claw clip. So there's me typing on my laptop, when I suddenly feel my hair tumble down my head, and a hand squeezes it. I turn around to see the man who doesn't let my hair go. "I could start a set with you," he mutters, a sickening grin on his face. Friends, if you need to scream bloody murder and want to make sure you're heard, a library is a very good place to do it. I don't think, just screamed. About 10 patrons and a librarian came running up. I instantly started crying, only to have the man say, "My girlfriend and I got in a fight." The security guard separated us, and upon hearing my side of the story, the man was kicked out of the library. The guard took me to my car. Still really freaked out about this one, but I'll get over it. So, I'm on my school netball team, and we have practice every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. My town is quite small, and I live literally on the outskirts of the town. I have a 20-minute bike ride to and from school, and live on a country road. That's also quite long, with only about 4 other houses, so when I finish practice, I go the opposite way home to all my friends who live near the town center. Since last week, Tuesday, we've been practicing till around 8:30 p.m. for our upcoming game this Saturday, with the girls' school on the other side of town from us. Because it's so late, most of the girls on our team have their parents pick them up, but for me, I just get on my bike and go home. So it was Tuesday, last week, when we were coming out of the changing rooms and going onto the court when I noticed this guy sitting on a bench down the hall, just watching me and my friends go in. I figured that he was a parent or something, so I just ignored him, but he looked pretty creepy. He had a greasy beard and receding long hair, a big double chin and glasses. Your textbook creep. My friend Rachel saw him too, so we asked a couple of girls when we went into the court if they knew him, but none of us did. Still, I just ignored him and continued on playing. He was there on Wednesday too. He sat on the same bench in the hall, looking at us coming out into the gym court. Rachel said that she was finding him a bit weird, and I agreed, so we told our coach, and she came out and told him to leave. I didn't see what happened, but she told us he's gone, so I didn't worry about it. On Friday, he wasn't there when we came into the court, but our coach told us to all sit down for a moment. When we sat down, she told us that parents from our school had been complaining about a man loitering around the school and trying to talk to the 9th and 10th graders, which is my year and the year above. I knew it was probably him, and she looked at me and Rachel while speaking, which I think confirmed it. She told us all, though, to just take safety precautions and try to get all of our parents to pick us up. I called my mom after practice, so she canceled work and picked me up. Yesterday, we were moved to the other court on the other side of the fitness center, closer to the factories and less quiet back streets behind, so the boys' basketball team could play a game or something. The guy wasn't there because the changing rooms aren't connected to a hallway in that part, but I was still pretty nervous because my mom said she couldn't pick me up. Practice went as normal and we all left through the back. I got my bike and said bye to Rachel and my other friends, put on my earphones, got my bike, and was about to get on my bike when the guy comes out of a doorway down the back. I start panicking. My friends must have walked a block by now to the front where their parents are waiting. If I get on my bike now, I'll reach them, I thought. He walks forward, and in the street light, I see scissors in his hand. "Please, can I have some hair?" he said. I was frozen still, shaking, thinking these are my last moments, so I just scream as loud as I can. I completely throw him off guard, and he drops the scissors and runs like nobody's business down the alley. Carly, this girl on my team, runs down with her mom, and I tell them what happened. When they take me back inside, I find my coach and tell her he came back, and they all stay with me and comfort me. But I just want to go home, so my coach drives me in her pickup truck. I call my mom at home, but she tells me he must have been just ill mentally. And I shouldn't have been scared, as he probably wouldn't have hurt me. I guess she's right, but scary creepy guy, let's not meet. At least we won't this week, because I'll be missing today and Friday's practice sessions. I have Arnold Chiari malformation, so I usually like to keep it quiet and not be the loud one in my group of friends, as it causes me extreme headaches, almost to the point of passing out because of the pain and also dizziness. But one particular day, my friends had convinced me to just take a lot of ibuprofen to counteract it beforehand, so that's what I did. We had all decided to go to a large spring, which is used by the locals for swimming since it's pretty deep. Our whole group decided on a little friendly competition to swim from one side to the other, just for shits and giggles. I wish it would have remained so lighthearted. Me being the person I was, I took swimming lessons for 11 years and was on major swim teams in my county. I made it first and was flaunting it by waving to the rest of our group, who were only still halfway across, even though the most athletic of us were only 2/3 of the way there. Anyways, as I waited, it was a very forestry natural place, with vegetation covering up almost anything, so it was unlikely my group saw me at this point after I stopped waving and boasting. I felt a presence behind me, but before I could turn around, a male hand grasped my mouth and pulled me down so that I was sitting on him. The position resembled how a grandfather would hold his granddaughter on his lap, but much more sinister and forceful. I tried to kick and scream, but my strength was slowed a lot from the amount of ibuprofen I took to counteract my Chiari. He had a rusty box cutter and it was resting dangerously on my throat. As I was struggling, he pulled my face closer to his and said, "I could kill you right now and I would enjoy every minute of it." I was still forced onto his lap and he was strangely petting my hair like a small child. Thankfully, one of my athletic friends finally made it across and started rustling through the bushes to come get me. As soon as the man heard my friend call my name, he ran away without a trace. I collapsed into my friend's arms and sputtered and spit and cried out my words. We went home and tried to file a report with the police/guards that own and patrol the springs. Minutes after we left the cabin, I heard them laughing and joking about how I was making it up, and saying the stupid woman must have been PMSing. I broke into tears again. To this day, I still remember the lustful and hungry look in his eyes, as if he would get some sort of enjoyment from my dead corpse. Honestly, that was the worst feeling, being that close to death and not having it even in fate's hands, but those of an evil human being. My stepfather is an ex-alcoholic and drug addict who is heavily involved in several Catholic churches and the local AA community. The drugs and alcohol must have seriously fried his brain because he still has really bad judgment and decision-making skills, especially when it comes to people. He has brought so many sketchy people into my life. Thankfully, nothing serious happened. I get it, he's trying to help others who are struggling with the same battle he went through, and maybe he is making a difference in some people's lives, but he's been bringing these kinds of people into my life since I was 4 years old. Some of them even lived with us for a while. I had kids young. I was 20 when I had my son, and 23 when I had my daughter. When my son had his first birthday, my stepdad and mom retired. My mom had me when she was 40 and decided to travel, going on mission trips with their church and moving to another state. They started working with this Catholic organization that specifically helps people who struggle with alcohol and drug addictions. The church gave them housing among their nuns and priests and paid them all a small amount of money to buy food and necessities while they worked with them. One year around Christmas time, my parents came home for the holiday and brought an older nun with them. She was probably in her 50s. My family got together and went to Santa's workshop, which was super crowded. My mom, stepdad, their nun friends, and my sisters and their kids came too. My daughter was about 6 months old, maybe less. She is a beautiful red-headed baby. I have received many comments from family and strangers on how beautiful she and her red hair are, and probably have a few other stories of people who don't understand personal boundaries regarding children. The nun was immediately taken by how beautiful my baby is and kept touching her, talking to her and wanting to hold her. It was a bit uncomfortable because this was my first time meeting her. Also, she wasn't acting this way with any of the other children that were there with us. My son, who was a 3-year-old at the time and had since been diagnosed with ADHD, was a handful and running all over the place, getting into everything. It's so hard going to places with him and her without their dad. He didn't come with us because he was most likely working. So I think I was distracted because my son was getting into something he wasn't supposed to, and I let go of the stroller for a second, and this nun immediately took it. She told me she would give me a break, and since she was a friend of my parents, and my family was all around us, I decided to let this nun push my daughter in the stroller. Another incident happened where my son was getting into something, and I was distracted again for less than a minute, and when I turned back around, the nun and my daughter were gone. I freaked out, and my whole family was still around me. Nobody knew where this nun went, and she didn't say anything to anyone about leaving. My family and I immediately started looking everywhere. Luckily, there were many of us, and we found the nun at the front of the building, right near the exit. It was terrifying. When we found her, she just said that she was taking my daughter on a stroll. I decided to leave right after that happened, and so did everyone else in my family. Luckily, I haven't seen her since. So yeah, creepy old nun that knows my parents. Let's not meet again. Edit. I posted this as a comment response, but somebody suggested I add it to my post. I forgot to mention some of the weird comments the nun had made about how if she hadn't become a nun and had children, she imagined they would look just like my daughter because red hair runs in her family. Another small but interesting detail is my oldest sister, who was there too with her 3 kids, also had a baby girl who was only a couple of months old at the time. I don't understand why the nun lashed onto my daughter in particular, other than having her red hair. Is hair color that big of a deal, or would it have been because I was a young mother and didn't have their father with me? Update. I called my mom today and asked a few questions about the nun. I believe she legitimately is a nun. She worked with her organization and was introduced to them by another nun and priest they know. She frequently worked with them when they lived in Maryland, setting up retreats and meetings for addicts. At one point, the nun had planned to go on a mission trip with my mother, but something came up and it didn't happen. My mom and stepdad moved around a lot during their retirement and haven't talked to her since they left Maryland, which was about 2 or 3 years ago. They recently moved back home and left the organization, and my stepfather works for a whole new one doing similar work, and my mom fully retired. My mom doesn't think there was anything weird about this situation, that it was no big deal, and the nun took my daughter on a stroll and didn't think to tell anyone where she was going. I haven't seen her since because she still lives in Maryland. My parents don't even talk to her anymore, and I actively try to avoid people my parents hang around now. I'm a teenager who helps his dad out on the allotment. If you don't know, an allotment is like a mini farm. You can plant veggies, have animals like chickens or rabbits to care for. This happened recently and it still creeps me out. In the evening, my dad says we need to go to the allotment to feed our chickens, as he forgot to feed them earlier that day. It was around 8 p.m. when I agreed and went into the car and started driving. When we got to our allotment, which is like a 15-minute drive, it was already dark outside. Not a lot, but dark. I opened the gates to the allotment, let my dad drive in, and then closed them. As I was about to, though, I saw a black car outside. The car belonged to a guy that used to be chill with my dad, but they both kind of fell off from talking to each other. My dad said he was becoming more mentally ill as the guy had a divorce and got his kids taken by the mother. The guy lives on the allotment now, even sleeping there. Remember, there are other people too in this allotment area, around 20 other ones, but there was no one else except me, dad, and the guy. After my dad parked the car, we got out and started getting the food for the chickens out the trunk. While my dad was doing that, I looked at his ex's friend's allotment, only to see him staring at us. It was dark, so I could only see a shadow of him, but I knew he was staring at us. I had a gut feeling, but I decided to ignore it. We went to the allotment, fed the chickens, and were about to go home until my dad almost forgot about something. He went to the shed at the end of the allotment to fetch something, and I was going to enter but had a feeling to wait it out instead. As I told my dad how much longer till he finds what he needs, I turned back to face our gate being opened. I didn't see it at first, but saw the guy trying to enter our allotment quietly. He stared at me and slowly closed the gate before just disappearing. I didn't react or say anything. I just stood there. I thought of telling my dad but didn't want to scare him or something. In the end, this isn't a horror movie where I should scream like a girl. When my dad left the shed, now we could go. As we were leaving, we heard a sound like an axe hitting the wood nonstop. We knew something was wrong. We quickly walked to our car, started it, and went to the gate. I left the car, creeped out by the guy being around in the allotment. I quickly opened the gate and let my dad drive through. As I was closing the gate, I saw something that terrified me immediately. The guy was just standing there, probably 20 meters away from me, looking at me. I couldn't see any details, but just darkness on him. He was holding something in his hand, but then he just moved and went into some bushes. My dad got out of the car to lock the gate. He looked at the bushes through the closed gate and rushed to his car. When we left and started driving, I told my dad he saw what I saw. He said he saw him hiding in the bushes, and he was squatting looking at us. Dad said he saw him holding something too, like an axe or a knife. We left pretty terrified, but we tried to laugh it off, knowing we were probably close to being attacked, or worse, dead. We came back to the allotment at the same time, around 8 p.m., a few days after what happened. We saw the guy's car in the allotment, and we knew we needed to be quick with feeding the chickens. As we did so, everything was going fine until we were about to leave. My dad stopped me and we head over a blue shed. My dad told me, "He's there. He's in the bushes." My heart dropped. I told my dad where he was and he said, "A 5-second walk," and we were done. We quickly ran to the car, closed it, and drove off. For a second I saw him. He had an axe. He wanted to sneak up on us and harm us. He wanted to kill us. The events in this story actually messed with my head a bit, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had a few friends in this new country, and was glad to find a place to live with some cool people my age. I started hanging with this crew, which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were cool. There was this one friend of my roommates named Frank that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was odd because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel slightly uncomfortable. First time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of questions that would suss me out. But he had a decent sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy and he was like, "Oh, you didn't know? Last year he found his wife and her brothers murdered in their flat. He is under investigation, but he didn't do it." I was taken aback by this. How could they really know he didn't do it, and why did they want to hang around with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He had been in prison most of the time in between then and now for violence. This did not help me in trusting him. I could not believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated but released for a lack of evidence. Back home at our place, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all of my friends would nod and believe him. I felt crazy being the only one who didn't believe it. He must have sensed it because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him. I said, "Yeah, sure I did," because by now I was starting to get really afraid of him. I asked him about the murders and he told me his vision of the event where he, according to him, found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had doubts. To my horror, he would at another time crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is, and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out because I couldn't figure out what he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid and started believing that he might actually be planning on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him. At one point, I started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder me, like he murdered those poor souls. This was a horrible time for me. On top of that, police had been tipped off about the relatively large amounts of weed being kept in the house and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me menacingly, as I always found him. "You are alright," he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you're okay." Kid you not. If he told me this, the others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was very glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly after, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and found my way back to some normality in my life. That's when I realized how messed up the whole thing was. I had been isolated with all of this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was properly mental and was convicted of 4 life sentences. He will never be a free man again. I'm not a great storyteller, but here we go. In 1985, when I was 15, I got a job doing dishes at a pizza place. After a while, I got moved up to the kitchen, making the pies and pasta. The owner usually had teenage kids or drifters, homeless vets, etc. doing the dishes, and he paid cash. On one particular Saturday after our shift ended, this scrawny white drifter who slept out of his beat-up car asked me if I could go to the mall and help him return something. I had asked him earlier to buy me beer, and so this was our trade-off. Off to the mall we went in his 1970s land barge. The item did not look new, but I tried to return the telescope to the store and, without a receipt, I was turned away. This drifter didn't seem that concerned with the failed transaction, but insisted that we cruise the mall parking lot looking for girls. Teen girls, as it turned out, mind you. It really only seemed cheesy to me at the time, but it really creeps me out today. Looking back, I see what he was doing. Returning an item for a refund was just a ploy, and to me being a decent-looking teenage kid, it only struck me later that he was trying to lure girls into the car. Luckily, none of them took the offer. His MO was ridiculous, and I was only embarrassed. He was in his mid-30s, but I could have and would have taken him down if something happened. A few months passed, and he was long gone from a dishwashing job, and I hadn't seen him since. I was in my friend's neighborhood, and we were walking to the basketball court at the park to shoot hoops. Who rolls up on me in the street? Creepy drifter in his old car. I was thinking, oh, not this guy again. After a brief hello, I said we were headed to play hoops, and he said something like this as he drove away. "I'm just looking for girls to meet. You know how it is." Keep in mind that this was somewhat isolated middle-class neighborhood, and he had no business being up in there. It was foolish of me to not report him, and it still bothers me. I just thought of him as an asshole when I should have realized the threat. I hope he didn't harm any girls. I posted my scariest experience yesterday, but my husband and I had quite a few freaky incidents where we used to live. A small town in North Carolina, and one particularly creepy one near our new place in Texas. This is one from North Carolina. It didn't scare me as much then as it should have until it was too late. We never felt safe living there, but again, had to for 3 more years. We lived in an old barn that had been renovated into 2 apartments, split right down the middle. Both sides had 2 floors and a basement. It had a pond down the hill behind it and a huge field stretched out in place of a front yard. Right smack dab in the middle of the field was a junk pile. Old rusty trash cans, tools, and just junk. It also had the remains of an old doghouse our neighbor had built and then set out there to rot when the dog died. Important later. So we had neighbors on the other side of the barn/duplex, a very sweet older couple. They had a garden right around the corner of the house where the wife would spend her day while her husband was at work. They mentioned one day that food had started disappearing from the kitchen. I thought I was losing my mind until an entire loaf of bread disappeared. They chalked it up to their delinquent daughter, stopping in without telling them and shopping as she'd done it before. Months went by and every now and again she'd mention something her daughter had stolen. Canned food, prepared meals from the fridge, a couple of pots and pans, some toilet paper, and so on. They never reported it because they didn't want their daughter to be in trouble. We just thought the whole thing was sad. Weird stuff started happening around the house. We found the remnants of a campfire by the pond one day and a bar of Irish Spring soap floating in the water. One day I looked out the window towards the pond and saw what I thought was a person standing near the water. It scared the heck out of me and I pointed it out to my husband. The longer we looked, we realized it was actually an item of clothing hanging from a tree. Maybe to dry. We were too spooked to go look, and it was gone the next day. Here's where it gets super scary. We started missing food. It only happened twice, but the second time we had gone on a rather long walk up our driveway to the mailbox. We'd left the door unlocked, and when we got back, the ingredients for grilled cheese were on the kitchen counter, and there was a hot pan still on the stove. We called 911 and they did a search of the yard. They didn't look in the field because it was just so wide open, with just the junk pile in the middle. Finally, one day our neighbor left her door open for 5 minutes and went to the garden right by the house. In that time, her purse was stolen from the living room. No cars had pulled up, so somebody had been watching her and took the opportunity. She called the police, and the next day they did another search. This time they went to the field and realized there was the old makeshift doghouse. Inside there was a bed of old blankets, food wrappers in a neat pile, 2 beers, rolls of toilet paper, our neighbor's missing pans, heroin stuff, and the sweet lady's missing purse. Everything out of it and stuffed with leaves to use as a pillow. There had been a heroin addict living on our property for months, stealing from us, bathing in the pond, and watching us from the best opportunity to do so. He never stole anything of value except for the purse, so I think he intended to be there a long while. I guess when he came back and saw his house empty, he just never came back. This happened 6 years ago when I was 13. Bear with me in my story because I've been on this subreddit a while without actually posting on it. I have a lot of creepy encounters, but this is the first I'd like to share. Anyways, during the summer, my mom had to leave us and tend to my grandpa, who had cancer and lived over 300 miles away. It was just my dad, my 16-year-old brother, and I for all 3 months of summer vacation. My dad worked all day, and my brother Dean went to summer school, which meant I was home alone for a good portion of the day. We live in a fairly safe neighborhood, and I knew always to lock the doors. One day I was preparing to cook lunch. Grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are the bomb. I was heating up the frying pan when I heard scratching coming from the front door. I turned off the heat and inched closer to the front door. I slowly see the doorknob jiggle and slowly turn. Thankfully, the top lock was still locked, but I heard it being tampered with. I quietly run into the kitchen and grab the frying pan. I really don't know why. I crawl into our pantry and post a status on Facebook asking someone to call the police and send them to my address. I hear somebody enter the room and walk around. They don't really sound like they're doing anything except walking. Then the footsteps get louder and louder. The pantry door opens and I hit the person in the head with as much force as I could with the hot pan. The person, a man in his 40s, is knocked out. The police arrive a few minutes after this happens. They call my dad and my brother to inform them of what happened. The police officer takes me to the station because I refuse to let them leave, and my brother agrees to meet me there. It turns out that the guy had a knife in his pocket and duct tape in the other. The police searched his car, which was parked in front of the house, found rope, trash bags, girls' clothing, another knife, and a single picture of me in the glove compartment. I really don't know what would have happened to me.